Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm joined by my dear friend Dr. Matthew Bunson, who is the Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. And he joins us every week to give us the latest in terms of church events and current events in light of the teachings of the church. Matthew is Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, like I mentioned. Matthew, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Oh, great to be with you as always.
Considering how much you have on your plate, it's a tremendous honor to have you with us every week. And this week is no different. We have a lot of events taking place here.
We
Uh,
do.
I want to start with the Second Vatican, the whole thing on the Second Vatican Council that Pope Leo made a statement
Yeah,
about, because it is not only so timely, I hope that it puts to rest that the heinous misrepresentation that the Second Vatican Council changed the rites of the liturgy.
that's right. Pope Leo, since January, in fact, I had the privilege of attending the first general audience in which he began what has been now a series of catecheses on the Second Vatican Council. He started with the dogmatic constitution on the Church Lumen Gentium, finished that up over the weeks, and now has begun its catechesis on the Constitution Sacrosanctum Concilium. In other words, the document of the Second Vatican Council on the liturgy. And I think you make a really important point that what he has stressed is that the Council Fathers sought to undertake reform of the rites, not sort of an abrogation or
Hmm.
abandonment of everything. So what he's really doing, and we saw this in the first set of catecheses on Lumen Gentium, is to not to put to rest, because I don't think he even thinks in those terms, but to discuss the continuity that the Second Vatican Council represents. You know, we always have these philosophical and theological arguments about was there a rupture with the council from the past, that everything now is up for grabs. No, Pope Leo the 14th is making it very clear that the council stands in great continuity with the history of the church, with the ecumenical councils that went before it. And I think that's a key starting point for any discussion here.
Matthew, if you might pardon me uh, asking you to speak deeper into the cohort that propagates that narrative. All of our listeners obviously don't hold that position. We
Mm-hmm.
understand the Second Vatican Council in light of the continuing magisterium of the Church. Can you please speak to why the contradictory position is not only erroneous, but harmful to the life of the Church?
Well, it's erroneous because any reading of the Second Vatican Council, any of the documents, I mean, you can pick one. 16 of these documents, you just pick one randomly. And when you read through it, you begin to appreciate two things. First, the intent of the Council Fathers to bring reform to the church, not rupture. And what I mean by that is it was the intention of John the 23rd. He said this in his opening homily for the Second Vatican Council, that what he wanted the council to do was to find a way to have that communication, that conversation with the modern world by applying in new ways the unchanging, here's that word, unchanging teachings of the church. Now, when you read the documents of the council, what you really appreciate, especially in the footnotes, is how much reference they make to previous popes, to previous councils, to the great tradition of the church, and of course to scripture. We are a church of scripture and tradition. And so the council itself and its documents reflects all of that reality of what it means to be authentically Catholic. And where we have encountered some difficulties is not with the council itself or with the documents, but with the interpretation that subsequently followed the documents and the council itself in some corners of the church. And that has been an ongoing challenge for much of the church in the decades that have followed, because there were those who were determined to speak and quote the spirit of the council. And I know you can weigh in on that. which opens the door for any type of an interpretation of what you think the council wants. And what it comes down to in the end is not adhering faithfully to the teachings and intent of the council, but to recreate the church in your own image. And as history has shown, that never turns out very well.
In fact, you would think that if we were humbler enough, we would look at history and learn from it and know that this way lies madness.
Yeah, that's right. And that way lies chaos, confusion, and ultimately division, which is a major concern for Pope Leo XIV. And not to put too fine a point on it, heresy, in the sense that you are rejecting what the church actually teaches. And we've seen this in a variety of ways. First, in some of the liturgical aberrations that followed the council, as some were trying to interpret it in a way that either made it much more Protestant or simply a ribald exercise of personal interest and whim. But we've also seen that in how some who look at this idea of rupture, that nothing before the council matters anymore. So we can recraft all of this as we wish. And that certainly lies in the area of homosexuality, as we have seen with the German synodal way, and also the German synodal way in the exercise of authority in the church. So sort of relying on, quote, that spirit of the council and tendentious interpretations of the council. You have those who would advocate for democratizing the church, for getting rid of the rightful authority in the life of the church, and putting everything up for grabs and up for a vote.
Thank the Lord that He is Lord over His church and that we're not, in fact, a democracy.
That's right.
Let's talk about Pope Leo's visit to Spain. People are excited about this. I remember you and I were talking briefly that papal visitations don't seem to garner as much global interest as they did during the papacy of John Paul II. But now we're seeing that, well, at the very least, 160,000 people are registering to talk to him.
Yeah, that's right. So Pope Leo is going to be visiting Spain, which is going to be the next sort of his major visits taking place. And I think this is, for a lot of us who follow the Holy Father, this is the next big thing. And I'm certainly excited about it for a couple of reasons. The first is, obviously, it's June 6th to the 12th. And he's going to inaugurate, and this is where I'm particularly interested, the Tower of Jesus Christ of the Sagrada Familia. And that is the magnificent Basilica of the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. That, of course, has the name Antoni Gaudí attached to it. So it is a culmination of a very long time for the creation of this magnificent church. And I go back especially to the visit of Pope Benedict XVI some years ago, and his deep fascination with church architecture and the use of light. And I think the Sagrada Familia is especially significant in that. So one of the things that Pope Leo is going to be doing is obviously visiting there. He's going to inaugurate this, but then he's marking the 100th anniversary of the death of Gaudí. And obviously this will make if I'm correct, the Sagrada Familia the tallest church in the world. And it comes not too long after the declaration just last year of Gaudí as a venerable, meaning that he is now open to beatification. So he was not just an architect, he was a deeply holy architect. But obviously there's a lot more happening on the part of the Holy Father, because as we saw in his visit to Africa, he is somebody who's going to have very packed schedules and is going to be bringing an immense amount of vigor to this visit.
I'm talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson. He's Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. We're talking about church events, current events in light of church teaching. We just touched on the joyous news that nearly 500,000 people already have signed up for main events in light of the Pope's visit to Spain. In a lot of ways, the faith is still alive and her embers need to be stoked into a fire for the Lord, and Pope Leo is determined to do that. Continuing on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Speed. I'm talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. We're talking about church events and church news. So, Matthew, do you have sort of concluding thoughts on
Yeah,
the fact that the Holy Father is going to Spain, and like you mentioned, the Sagrada Familia? I mean, it's just amazing. I love seeing these numbers, not because it's a numbers game, but it just indicates that for all the talk of the complete secularization of formerly Christian nations, well, clearly people still love the Pope.
yeah, that's right. They love this pope. They love all popes.
Hmm.
But you also make an important point, Marius, and that is that there are certain assumptions that people are making, especially about Western Europe, Spain in particular, that somehow the Catholic faith, the Christian faith, has been abandoned. We've seen already that there are large numbers of baptisms and entries into the church over the last couple of Easters in Spain. And there is still, I think, very much a strong Catholic presence, and that's something that Pope Leo XIV is going to be seeing himself. So he's taking a trip that's going to include visits to Madrid, to Barcelona, as we've just been talking, as well as to the Canary Islands. Now, what's the point of that? Well, for him there, it's one of the major centers where migration is happening. In fact, he's going to be meeting with migrants who cross the Atlantic, and obviously local organizations that are helping those who are finding their way to places like Tenerife in the Canary Islands. So it's really an opportunity to spend time with the Catholics of Spain, but also to remind Spain of the importance of faith, of unity, and also caring for migrants, regardless of the circumstances in which they find themselves and how they arrived. So I think we can see some important messages coming out of that.
To move on, not there's so much more we could talk about in
Yeah.
everything you just said, but just to move on to make sure that we can cover some of this too. The United States bishops see the need to consecrate our nation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Tell us about their thought process here.
Yeah, so on last November of last year, the bishops of the U.S. voted to consecrate the nation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And they made the decision for a couple of reasons. First, if we go back to the last encyclical of Pope Francis, the Lexit Nos, he brought devotion to the Sacred Heart really to the forefront. And it was his desire to bring the devotion to the Sacred Heart to the forefront of Catholic life and culture. And so the bishops really took note of that. And as I said, it was in, I think, November of 2024. So not too long before Pope Francis passed away, he issued this encyclical. So the bishops are also cognizant of the fact that here we are in the what's called, this is my favorite word of the year, the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of America. So what better time than this 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence to consecrate the nation to the Sacred Heart? And so the bishops, when they are gathered in Orlando next month, on the 11th of June, are going to, while they're in Orlando, to make that consecration happen. And it's a pretty notable moment. And it comes in many ways, too, on the heels of what have we just been seeing with the Eucharistic pilgrimages, with the Eucharistic Congress. Just this weekend, we have the start of a new Eucharistic pilgrimage across the country that begins in St. Augustine and is going to work its way through the original 13 colonies across 18 dioceses, culminating on July 5th in Philadelphia. So we have a sequence of events here that I think are really going to be able to highlight the importance of the Eucharist and the importance of the Sacred Heart. And so I really salute the bishops for doing this.
You know, you read my mind, and I almost wonder if this is coming as a spiritual fruit, as a result of a spiritual fruit of the National Eucharistic Congress.
Yeah, some have made the point, and we always have to be careful in extrapolating too many assumptions based on
Hmm.
data. But we have seen in the last several years, in the period after the Eucharistic pilgrimages and the Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis, a massive increase in conversions and baptisms in the church. and to the church.
Mhm.
Is it the direct cause of the Eucharistic pilgrimages and this sudden heightened devotion to the Eucharist across the country? In the light of continuing studies, I would argue, why not? Uh, I think there is something has been happening spiritually in this country. There has been this movement. And so I think anything that continues to advance that, including this consecration to the Sacred Heart, is well worth our doing. And as they say, it's a win-win. What can possibly be harmful or a waste of our time in doing this? Every moment spent in Eucharistic adoration is a positive one, is a valuable one for us. And the consecration of the Sacred Heart, we need that now. And it comes on the heels, as I said, of Pope Francis's encyclical De Lexit Nos, but also the appeals of multiple popes over the centuries, and certainly in the 20th century. I think especially of Pope Pius XII, and something that he wrote about the importance of rekindling this devotion to the Sacred Heart.
Are they encouraging lay people to participate in this in their own ways, especially in their households?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I think we're going to see bishops across the United States undertaking similar consecrations and really celebrating these. I think every layperson, every Catholic should be aware of, for example, the Eucharistic pilgrimages and finding ways to make this part of their life. And so that the USCCB, I know, in anticipation of all of this, is availing itself of various resources. If you go to usccb.org, you can certainly find all of the available resources are going to be there for really leaning into this consecration, especially on the local parish level.
Tell us about what the U.S. bishops are also saying about the church in Mali, given that they're undergoing severe attacks.
Yeah, well, we have seen across whole parts of the world now really alarming attacks on Christians. And so the bishops, I really appreciate the fact that the bishops are recognizing the amount of violence that is happening. And so the bishops themselves have been speaking out again about recent attacks that have taken place in that country. And so once again, all we can do is continue to pray for our sisters and brothers around the world, because there have been certainly a number of coordinated attacks that took place at the end of April. And that includes various military positions. It includes heightened violence carried out, to no one's surprise, by various radical Islamist groups, including various affiliates of Al-Qaeda. And this comes at a time, too, when Christians in places like Nigeria and elsewhere are under direct assault by Islamists, by jihadists, and remarkably and depressingly well-funded militant groups.
To essentially draw a conversation to a close, especially in terms of even these attacks requiring the transmission of the faith, Cardinal Fernandez and the upcoming document on the transmission of the faith. Yeah,
this is something that took some of us not by surprise, but we appreciate the fact that the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith under Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez is going to be issuing a document on the transmission of the faith. And he makes an important point, and that is the breakdown of intergenerational transmission in many countries. In other words, we're seeing this as sort of a break between generations. And certainly you and I have talked, and many people have talked about the sad state of catechesis in some of the most recent decades. And that's something that the bishops, I know, have been trying to correct, that Pope Leo has talked about. And now we're going to have a document that we need to find ways to proclaim, as he puts it, in an attractive manner, the kerygma, the proclamation of the gospel, as he writes, so that it's capable of provoking an experience of what? An encounter with the Lord. So I think it'll be a welcome document. It will, like everything else from the DDF, be very closely read. And I think we're all looking forward to seeing it when it comes out.
My guest has been Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, and he's been generously walking us through church news. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.